It is a law in Umu Oda that a father has the right to kill his female child if he does not want her. In this village, a man's pride is tied to his first child. If a mother gives birth to a son as her first baby, the father will walk through the village square with his chest out, feeling like a king. But if the first baby is a girl, the father feels like a failure. Many men in Umu Oda choose to end the life of a firstborn daughter just to keep their prestige among other men. Ejede was a woman who knew this law very well. She was married to Madu, a man who was obsessed with his reputation. Madu was a tall, powerful hunter who wanted everyone to respect him. For months, he had been telling the village elders that his wife was carrying a lion, a son, who would take over his hunting bow one day. When the time came for Ejede to give birth, she did something very brave. She did not call the midwives. She stayed inside her small mud hut alone, biting her lip so she would not scream. She knew that if any other woman saw the baby first, the truth would be out. The sun was setting when the baby finally arrived. Ejede held the child and looked down. Her heart sank into her stomach. It was a girl. The baby had soft skin and large, beautiful eyes, but she was exactly what the law of Umu Oda hated. Outside the hut, Madu was pacing the red earth. He was holding his heavy machete, waiting for the news. He shouted for Ejede to tell him if he was the father of a man. Ejede looked at her daughter. She knew that if she opened the door, Madu would take the baby to the forest and she would never see her again. She also knew that if she told the truth, her own life would be over. She looked at the heavy wooden stool in the corner of the room. She looked at the fire burning in the hearth. "It is a son, Madu," Ejede called out, her voice loud and steady. "But he is very small. Come and see your heir." Madu pushed the door open, his face bright with a wicked kind of joy. He dropped his machete on the floor and leaned over to look at the baby on the bed. He was so happy that he did not notice the heavy wooden stool Ejede was holding behind her back. He did not see the tears of anger in her eyes. Before Madu could touch the baby, Ejede struck him with all her strength. Madu fell to the floor and did not move again. The house was silent. Ejede sat there for a long time, breathing hard. She had killed her husband to save her daughter. She knew that people would ask questions. If she told them her husband died the same night she gave birth to a girl, they would be suspicious. So, Ejede made a plan. She cleaned the blood and wrapped the baby girl tightly in a boy's cloth. The next morning, she stepped out of the hut and began to wail. She told the villagers that a great spirit had taken her husband in the night, but that he had left behind a strong son to take his place. She named the child Kamsi. From that day on, Kamsi had to grow up pretending to be a man, and only Ejede knew the truth hidden under the clothes. The secret that Ejede kept in her heart became as heavy as a mountain. To the villagers, Kamsi was a miracle child. They called her the son of the spirit because her father, Madu, had died on the very night she was born. They expected Kamsi to grow into a hunter even greater than her father. But inside their huts, away from the prying eyes of the neighbors, life was a constant battle of hiding. Ejede never allowed Kamsi to swim in the local river with the other boys. She never allowed her to take off her tunic in the heat of the afternoon. "Kamsi, listen to me," Ejede would whisper every morning as she wrapped a thick cloth tightly around the girl's chest. "In this village, your life is a lie, but it is a lie that keeps you breathing. If they see who you really are, they will say you are a curse. They will say I killed your father to protect a girl. We must be like the leopard, quiet and invisible." Kamsi was now 25 years old. She was 6 feet tall, with a strong, graceful build that she hid under baggy hunter's tunics and thick brown trousers. Her skin was as beautiful and smooth as polished ebony, and her eyes were large and full of a deep, silent intelligence. While other girls her age were learning to dance in the village square and wearing colorful beads around their waists, Kamsi was learning how to sharpen a machete and track animals in the bush. Every time Kamsi walked through the village, she felt the eyes of the elders on her. They were looking for the strength of Madu in her face. They wanted to see a warrior. One afternoon, the village gong sounded. It was a loud, metallic ring that echoed through the trees. the chief of Umuoda had called a meeting. Kamsi stood among the men, her hands tucked into her pockets, her heart beating fast. She felt like a bird trapped in a cage of wood and iron. The chief stood on a high stone, his skin looking like wrinkled leather under the bright hot sun. He announced that the time had come for the young men of the village to prove their worth. There was to be a great hunt in the deep forest. The young man who brought back the largest beast would be given a seat among the elders. Kamsi felt a cold sweat on her forehead. To hunt with the men meant sleeping in the forest. It meant being close to them for days and nights. It meant that her secret was in more danger than ever before. Beside her stood a young man named Jide. He was loud and boastful, just like Madu used to be. Jide slapped Kamsi on the back, nearly knocking her forward. "Are you ready, son of Madu?" Jide laughed, his voice booming. "Or have you been spending too much time in the kitchen with your mother? We will see if you have the blood of a hunter or the heart of a chicken." Kamsi did not answer. She just looked at the ground, her jaw tight. She knew that if she refused to go, people would start to talk. They would say she was weak. They would start to ask why the son of a great hunter was afraid of the woods. That night, Ejede sat by the fire, her face looking older in the dancing light. She was holding the same wooden stool she had used to kill her husband years ago. She looked at Kamsi, who was sharpening her father's old hunting knife. "You cannot go, Kamsi," Ejede said, her voice shaking. "The forest is a place where men become brothers. They will see, they will find out." "If I stay, mother, they will know anyway," Kamsi replied. Her voice was deeper than a girl's, but softer than a man's. "I have lived as a ghost for all these years. I am tired of hiding in the dark. If the gods want me to die in that forest, then let it be. But I will not let them call you the mother of a coward." Ejede reached out and touched Kamsi's hand. Her fingers were rough from years of farming. She realized that her daughter was no longer a baby she could hide under a cloth. She was a woman who had been forced to become a man, and the weight of that mask was starting to break her. As the first light of the sun began to turn the sky a bright, vivid purple, the young men of the village gathered at the edge of the forest. Kamsi walked among them, her father's bow slung over her shoulder. She looked up at the tall trees and the thick vines. She knew that she was walking into the mouth of a lion, and she didn't know if she would come out alive. To understand why the men of Umuoda were so afraid of a girl child, one had to look back many generations. Before the law was made, the village was a very different place. Ejede's grandmother used to tell the story in whispers when the men were deep in their sleep. In those ancient days, the women of Umuoda were many. For every boy born, 5 girls were born. The village was filled with the voices and the strength of women. The women were the ones who managed the markets, and they were the ones who knew how to farm the land better than anyone else. They were growing in number every single day. The men began to watch from a distance, and a great fear started to grow in their hearts. They realized that if the number of women continued to increase at that rate, the women would eventually realize their own power. The men were terrified that the women would come together, wage a war against them, and subdue every man in the village. They feared that one day, the women would be the ones giving the orders, and the men would become the servants. To stop this from happening, the men held a secret meeting. They decided that they had to find a way to reduce the number of women in the society. They created the law that said it was legal to kill a female child, especially if she was the firstborn. By killing the firstborn girls, they ensured that the population of women would never grow large enough to challenge the men. They turned their fear into a law to make sure they always stayed in control. Over time, this became a tradition that no one dared to break. Kamsi knew this history. As she walked into the deep forest with the hunting party, she felt the weight of that old fear on her shoulders. She looked at Jide and the other young men. They were laughing and swinging their machetes, completely unaware that a woman was walking right beside them. The forest was very bright and green. The sun was shining through the trees, making the leaves look like they were glowing. But for Kamsi, the beauty was a trap. "We split up here," Jide shouted. His voice was loud in the quiet woods. "Kamsi, you take the eastern trail toward the river, Let us see if the son of a great hunter can actually kill something today." The men laughed and walked away into the bush. Kamsi stood alone. For the first time in years, she was away from her mother's eyes. She was away from the tight clothes that hid her body. She walked toward the river, holding her father's bow tightly. Suddenly, she heard a sound in the tall grass. It was not an animal, it was the sound of someone crying. Kamsi raised her bow and pulled the string back. Her eyes narrowed as she searched the shadows. Out of the grass stepped a young woman. She was about the same age as Kamsi. She was wearing a blue cloth and she was crying. In her arms, she was holding a small bundle. Kamsi lowered her bow. She saw the terror in the girl's eyes. "Please," the girl whispered, her body shaking. "My husband is coming. He found out the baby is a girl. He said he will not have a female child as his firstborn. He wants to kill her. Please, do not tell him you saw us." Kamsi looked at the girl, and then she looked at the baby. In that moment, years of pretending to be a man felt like a heavy stone in her heart. She realized that the war the ancient men feared was still going on, and she was standing right in the middle of it.
"Nobody must find out you are a woman, else you are dead."
Mama, I am so tired of pretending. When is it going? When do I get to just be myself?
It ends when it is safe. And it is not safe yet. So you will wrap this cloth around your chest and you will put on your tunic and you will walk out of that door as your father's son.
Kamsi looked at the woman and the baby girl. She heard the heavy footsteps of a man coming through the dry leaves. It was the woman's husband. He was coming to take the baby and kill her because of the village law. Kamsi knew she had to make a choice. If she acted like a man, she would have to let the man take the child. But Kamsi was not a man. The husband stepped out of the trees. He was a large man with a very angry face. He was holding a sharp knife. When he saw Kamsi, he stopped. He thought Kamsi was a fellow hunter. "Move out of my way, son of Madu," the man shouted. "This woman has given me a female child as my firstborn. She is a curse to my name. I must finish her before the sun goes down." The young woman fell to her knees, crying and begging. Kamsi felt a fire burning in her chest. She remembered how her mother, Ejede, had killed her own husband just to save her. She realized that the killing had to stop. Kamsi did not move. She stood tall and pulled her bowstring tight. "I will not move," Kamsi said. Her voice was loud and clear. "This baby will live. The law of Umuoda is a wicked law and it ends today." The man laughed. He thought Kamsi was joking. He stepped forward to grab the woman, but Kamsi fired an arrow into the ground right at his feet. The man stopped, his eyes wide with surprise. At that moment, Jide and the other hunters arrived. They had heard the shouting and came to see what was happening. They saw Kamsi protecting a woman and a female child. They saw the man with the knife. "What is this, Kamsi?" Jide asked, looking confused. "Why are you protecting a girl child? Have you forgotten our prestige?" Kamsi took a deep breath. She knew that if she spoke the truth, she might die, but she was tired of the lie. She reached up and unbuttoned the heavy hunter's tunic, pulling it off her shoulders and dropping it to the forest floor. Underneath, she was wearing only a tight black singlet. With her tunic gone, her most visible feminine features were now open and clear to everyone. The hunters gasped. They fell back in shock. They could not believe their eyes. The person they thought was the strongest young man in the village was actually a woman. "I am Kamsi, the daughter of Ejede," she shouted so everyone could hear. "My mother killed my father 18 years ago to save my life. I have lived as a man to show you that a woman can hunt, a woman can protect, and a woman can be as strong as any man." The men's shock turned into a dark anger. They felt cheated. They began to shout and move toward her to grab her. Kamsi turned and began to run. She ran with the young mother and the baby through the bushes, heading straight for the village square. The men followed close behind, screaming that the law must be obeyed and the curse must be removed. When they reached the village square, the elders were already gathered under the big tree. They looked at Kamsi with anger. When they saw her female features, they felt insulted. They felt that Ejede had mocked them for 18 years. "You are a curse," the chief shouted at Kamsi. You and your mother have broken the law of our ancestors. Both of you and this baby girl must be taken to the forest and left there to die. This is the only way to keep our prestige." The men of the village moved forward, picking up sticks and heavy whips. They wanted to beat Kamsi and Ejede to show them that men were still in control. But as the first man raised his whip, something happened that had never happened in Umuoda. Ejede stepped forward and stood in front of her daughter. Then, the neighbor from the next hut stepped forward. Then the women from the market, the women from the farms, and the old grandmothers who had lost their own firstborn daughters years ago all began to move. Hundreds of women walked into the center of the square. They did not have machetes or bows, but they had a look in their eyes that was more terrifying than any weapon. They formed a massive, tight circle around Kamsi, the young mother, and the baby. They locked their arms together, shoulder to shoulder, creating a wall of human flesh. "If you want to kill one daughter today, you must kill all the mothers," Ejede cried out. Her voice was like thunder. The men were shocked. They began to flog the women with their whips. They hit their backs and their arms, trying to make them break the circle. The sound of the whips hitting skin was loud in the quiet square. But the women did not scream. They did not run. They stood their ground, held each other tighter, and began to sing a low, mournful song. It was a song for every baby girl who had ever been taken to the forest. The men stopped. Their arms were tired, and their hearts were starting to fail them. They looked at their own wives, their own mothers, and their own sisters bleeding but refusing to move. The men realized that the very thing their ancestors had feared was finally happening. The women were not using spears, but they were subduing the men with their perseverance. The men saw that no matter how hard they hit, the women were ready to die for the cause. The strength of a mother who has lost a child is a force that no law can break. The men looked at the ground, feeling a deep shame. They realized that they were not dealing with prestige. They were dealing with human beings who had been pushed to the wall for too long. The chief dropped his staff. He looked at the circle of women and saw the blood on their clothes, yet they were still standing tall. He knew the law was dead. It had been killed by the bravery of the women it tried to destroy. "Stop," the chief commanded. The square went silent. "The law is revoked. From this day, every child born in Umuoda, whether male or female, belongs to the community. No hand shall be raised against a daughter again." The women did not cheer immediately. They stayed in their circle for a long moment, making sure the words were real. Then, they slowly let go of each other's arms. Ejede hugged Kamsi, and the young mother held her baby girl up to the sun. The secret war was over. Umuoda was finally a village of both sons and daughters, and Kamsi could finally walk the earth as the woman she was always meant to be.